What if everything you thought you knew about World War II was only half the story? Hidden beneath the battles and textbooks are shocking secrets your history teacher never told you, stories of deception, courage, and dark cover-ups that changed the course of history. From ghost armies and female spies to forbidden massacres and ethical dilemmas, this video will reveal the untold truths that challenge everything you've learned about the deadliest war in human history. Ready to uncover them? The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, is often portrayed as a sudden, unprovoked assault that thrust the United States into World War II. The traditional narrative is simple. Japan launched a surprise attack, catching American military forces off guard and compelling the U.S. to declare war. But beneath this well-known story lies a complex and little-discussed diplomatic drama. Secret peace talks that unfolded just weeks before the attack, involving intense negotiations that history books rarely emphasize. These talks reveal a tangled web of miscommunication, mistrust, and missed opportunities that challenge the notion of the attack as a pure surprise. In the months leading up to December 1941, the geopolitical climate in East Asia was volatile. Japan had aggressively expanded its empire, invading China in 1937 and occupying French Indochina by 1940. The United States, alarmed by Japanese expansionism and its threat to American interests in the Pacific, imposed economic sanctions and embargoes, including restricting oil exports to Japan. These sanctions put immense pressure on Japan's military and industrial capabilities, as oil was vital for their war machinery. Diplomatic relations between the two countries were strained, but a war was not yet inevitable. Behind closed doors, the U.S. government was engaged in delicate negotiations with Japanese diplomats. The Japanese ambassador to the U.S., Kichisaburo Nomura, and Special Envoy Saburo Kurusu met with American officials throughout the fall of 1941. The negotiations focused on finding a peaceful solution that would allow Japan to withdraw from China and lift the embargoes in exchange for Japan agreeing to halt further military expansion. Both sides knew the stakes. A breakdown in talks could mean war, but no one wanted that outcome publicly. One of the most striking facts is that these peace talks were kept hidden from the American public and even many officials in Washington. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration was deeply divided. Some advisors believed war with Japan was inevitable and even desirable to unify the country and eliminate the Axis threat. Others genuinely hoped for a diplomatic resolution. As negotiations dragged on, the U.S. was simultaneously preparing its military defenses, sending mixed signals to the Japanese negotiators. Japan, too, was internally conflicted. The military faction was adamant about securing resources by force if necessary, while the diplomatic wing hoped to avoid war with the U.S. The Japanese government sent cryptic messages indicating a willingness to negotiate, but these were overshadowed by secret plans for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Military planners saw the negotiations as a stalling tactic, buying time to prepare the surprise assault. On November 26, 1941, the Japanese government sent a final message to Washington, formally breaking off negotiations. However, this message was delivered late and only hours before the attack was launched, leaving the U.S. diplomats unaware of Japan's true intentions. In fact, the Japanese embassy in Washington was still drafting a peace proposal even as the bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. This juxtaposition of diplomacy and military aggression reveals a duplicitous strategy that has long puzzled historians. Declassified documents from post-war investigations shed light on the diplomatic efforts and the complex web of secrecy. The U.S. had intercepted Japanese communications but failed to fully interpret the intent behind them. Meanwhile, Japan deliberately delayed notifying the U.S. of the attack until it was underway, violating diplomatic protocol. This act of deception has fueled debates about whether Roosevelt had prior knowledge of the attack and allowed it to happen to justify entering the war, an accusation that remains controversial but persists in popular conspiracy theories. What is certain is that these secret peace talks were more than a mere backdrop to the attack. They were an integral part of the political strategy on both sides. The negotiations show that neither country wanted to appear weak. Japan sought to preserve its image as a power unwilling to back down, while the U.S. wanted to maintain moral high ground, justifying its eventual declaration of war as a response to aggression rather than provocation. The impact of these negotiations extended beyond the immediate events. After the attack, the U.S. government leveraged the narrative of surprise and treachery to rally public support for the war effort. The story of secret talks faded from public discourse, replaced by the urgent need to focus on military victory. However, the diplomatic history highlights the fragile nature of peace in a time of escalating global conflict. Historians now argue that understanding the secret U.S.-Japanese peace talks is essential to grasp the full context of Pearl Harbor. It forces a reconsideration of simplistic good versus evil narratives and encourages a more nuanced view of international relations, where diplomacy and war often coexist uneasily. It also underscores how miscommunication and mistrust can accelerate a slide into conflict, a lesson that resonates in today's geopolitical tensions. In the end, the story of the secret peace talks reveals a human dimension to history. Leaders caught between the desire for peace and the pressure of military ambitions, diplomats trying to bridge impossible divides, and ordinary people whose lives were forever changed by decisions made behind closed doors. It reminds us that history is rarely black and white, but filled with shades of gray where truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. When we think of D-Day, the iconic image is of thousands of Allied soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy under heavy fire. The courage, sacrifice, and sheer scale of the invasion are etched into history. Yet, hidden behind this monumental event was a remarkable secret operation that fooled Adolf Hitler and the Nazi High Command into believing the invasion would happen somewhere else entirely. This was Operation Fortitude, a masterstroke of deception that created a ghost army to manipulate enemy intelligence, and its story has long been overshadowed by the battlefield heroics it helped enable. The goal of Operation Fortitude was simple but bold: convince the Germans that the Allied invasion would take place not in Normandy, but at the Pas-de-Calais region, the narrowest point between Britain and France. This would keep German troops pinned far from the real landing site, ensuring a strategic advantage for the Allies. The success of D-Day depended not just on brute force, but on cunning and misdirection. The British and American military intelligence agencies collaborated closely on this plan. They assembled what became known as the 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, an entirely fictitious army purportedly commanded by General George S. Patton, one of the most respected and feared American generals of the war. To the Germans, Patton was a formidable opponent, and positioning him opposite Pas-de-Calais seemed logical. But how do you create an entire army that doesn't exist? The answer was a mixture of artifice, technology, and human ingenuity. Inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were deployed across the English countryside and coastal areas visible from German reconnaissance planes. These rubber decoys looked remarkably real from the air, with shadows and sizes that fooled even seasoned observers. In addition to the physical props, the Allies employed fake radio traffic to simulate the communications of an entire army preparing to invade at Pas-de-Calais. Radio operators transmitted coded messages and chatter designed to mimic the noise of a real force coordinating logistics, troop movements, and battle plans. German intelligence intercepted these signals and interpreted them as authentic, reinforcing the illusion. Double agents also played a critical role. The British intelligence service ran a network of spies and double agents, many of whom fed carefully crafted misinformation directly to German intelligence. One famous agent, known as Garbo, convinced the Nazis that the Normandy invasion was merely a diversion. This web of lies ensured that German commanders remained uncertain and distracted. Operation Fortitude was not without its risks. Maintaining the deception required careful timing and coordination. The Allies had to ensure that reconnaissance planes regularly spotted the fake army while simultaneously keeping real forces hidden. Training exercises, troop movements, and even dummy camps contributed to the illusion. Every element had to support the story being told. The payoff came in June 1944. When the Allied forces launched the Normandy invasion, the Germans hesitated. Hitler and his generals believed the main assault would be at Pas-de-Calais and held their best troops there, including armored divisions, in reserve. This hesitation prevented them from quickly reinforcing Normandy, giving the Allies a critical foothold. Even after the invasion began, the deception continued. The Allies maintained fake radio traffic and dummy installations to keep German forces guessing. Hitler's stubborn belief in the deception meant German counterattacks were delayed and dispersed, helping secure the eventual success of Operation Overlord. The success of Operation Fortitude had enormous consequences. It saved countless lives by reducing the resistance faced by invading troops and hastened the liberation of Western Europe. It also demonstrated the power of intelligence and psychological warfare, proving that battles could be won not only with weapons but with information and misdirection. Yet, for decades, this ghost army remained classified and unknown to the public. The incredible creativity of the deception was overshadowed by the more visible and brutal combat on the beaches. Many soldiers and civilians had no idea that the war was shaped by inflatable tanks and fake radio signals as much as by bullets and bombs. Only in recent years have historians and the military shared the full story of Operation Fortitude. Museums and documentaries now highlight the ingenuity behind the Ghost Army, honoring the unsung heroes who wove this grand illusion. The operation is studied today as a classic example of strategic deception and remains a testament to the complexity of warfare. What makes Operation Fortitude truly remarkable is its blend of imagination and precision. The planners understood their enemy's psychology and exploited it with theatrical flair. They created a convincing narrative so immersive that it fooled one of the most ruthless and intelligent dictators in history. This story challenges the simplistic view of war as mere brute force. It reminds us that intelligence, creativity, and deception can shape outcomes in profound ways. The Ghost Army that never existed played a decisive role in one of history's most important battles, showing that sometimes the greatest weapon is a well-crafted lie. When we picture World War II, images of soldiers storming battlefields, tanks rolling through Europe, and airplanes dogfighting in the skies dominate our minds. The focus has long been on male combatants, but behind the scenes, and often right in the thick of enemy territory, thousands of women played critical roles as spies, saboteurs, and resistance fighters. Their bravery and intelligence gathering changed the course of the war, yet for decades their stories were barely mentioned or hidden entirely. This chapter shines a light on these remarkable women whose contributions were as vital as any frontline soldier. From occupied France to the forests of Poland and the mountains of Yugoslavia, women served as secret operatives who took on some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. Their ability to blend in, communicate covertly, and endure harsh conditions made them invaluable to the Allied war effort. Some were trained by Britain's Special Operations Executive, SOE, a secret organization created to conduct espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance in enemy-occupied Europe. One of the most famous female spies was Violette Sabo, a British-French agent who undertook multiple missions in Nazi-occupied France. Trained in explosives and hand-to-hand combat, Sabo was dropped behind enemy lines to organize sabotage groups and gather intelligence. Her courage was legendary, and though she was eventually captured and executed by the Gestapo, her legacy inspired many others. Women often served as couriers, moving secret messages, weapons, and supplies through dangerous territory. Their roles might seem less dramatic, but without their skills and stealth, resistance networks would have been crippled. Women's smaller size and less suspicious appearance helped them slip past checkpoints and patrols undetected. In many cases, they disguised themselves as nurses, housekeepers, or even mothers to conceal their true missions. In the Soviet Union, women took on both combat and espionage roles. The famous Night Witches, female bomber pilots, flew deadly missions against German forces, while other women served as partisans and spies. The bravery of these women defied traditional gender roles and showed the essential nature of female participation in the war. Another remarkable story is that of Nancy Wake, an Australian who became one of the Allies' most decorated spies. Known as the White Mouse by the Gestapo for her ability to evade capture, Wake worked with the French resistance, coordinating attacks against German supply lines and helping downed Allied pilots escape. She survived torture and imprisonment, always refusing to betray her comrades. Despite their extraordinary contributions, many women spies were marginalized after the war. Official histories often downplayed or ignored their roles, returning to traditional narratives that centered on male soldiers. This erasure was partly due to post-war societal expectations and the desire to restore pre-war gender norms, which meant women were pushed back into domestic roles. The secrecy surrounding espionage also contributed to their invisibility. Many women could not speak openly about their missions because of classified information or fear of reprisals. Some never received recognition during their lifetimes, their sacrifices lost to history until researchers began uncovering hidden archives decades later. Today, efforts are being made to honor these women. Museums, books, and films are bringing their stories to light, recognizing that the war was fought not just in trenches and battlefields but in shadows and coded messages. Their courage, intelligence, and resilience expanded the possibilities of what women could do in times of crisis and changed the face of warfare forever. The story of women spies in World War II teaches us that war is not just about who fires the first shot, but also about who can outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast the enemy through stealth and cunning. It challenges stereotypes about gender and warfare, showing that bravery and sacrifice come in many forms. Their hidden history also reminds us to look beyond the familiar stories and explore the full spectrum of human experience during conflict. By remembering these women, we gain a deeper, richer understanding of World War II, one that honors the diversity of those who fought and the complex ways the war shaped our world. World War II is marked by countless stories of heroism, tragedy, and brutal conflict, but some dark chapters remained hidden or distorted for decades. One such story is the Katyn Massacre, a horrifying atrocity that saw over 20,000 Polish officers, intellectuals, and elites executed in 1940 by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD. For years, this massacre was denied, blamed on the Nazis, and shrouded in political lies. The truth behind Katyn is a grim testament to the war's complexity and the devastating human cost that was deliberately concealed from the world. The backdrop to Katyn begins in 1939 when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, secretly agreeing to divide Poland between them. As the Germans invaded from the west, the Soviets moved in from the east, capturing thousands of Polish military officers and members of the intelligentsia, teachers, lawyers, doctors, and community leaders. These captives were seen as threats to Soviet control and were detained in camps across the USSR. In the spring of 1940, Soviet authorities, under orders from Stalin and his closest advisors, decided to eliminate these prisoners. The reasoning was chilling. By eradicating Poland's elite, the Soviets aimed to cripple any future resistance or leadership that could challenge Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe. The NKVD carried out mass executions in secret forest locations, most notoriously in the Katyn forest near Smolensk. The killings were swift and systematic. Prisoners were taken from camps, transported in groups, and executed with single shots to the back of the head. Their bodies were buried in mass graves, hidden beneath layers of earth and forest. The scale of the massacre was staggering, yet the Soviets claimed ignorance, insisting that the Nazis committed the crime when they occupied the area in 1941. For years, the Katyn massacre was a taboo topic. The Soviet Union, a key ally of the Western powers during World War II, used propaganda to shift blame, while the Polish government in exile and survivors struggled to reveal the truth. The massacre caused a diplomatic rift, notably when the Soviets cut ties with the Polish government in exile after it demanded an investigation. It wasn't until 1943 that the Nazis, seeking to drive a wedge between the Allies, announced the discovery of the mass graves. They invited international experts to inspect the site, but their motives were immediately suspect. The Allies were caught in a political dilemma. Exposing the Soviet crime risked undermining the wartime alliance with the USSR, a vital partner against Hitler. After the war, the Soviet Union continued to deny responsibility, punishing anyone who spoke about Katyn and censoring historical records. The massacre became a symbol of Cold War misinformation, with the West hesitant to confront the Soviet Union openly on the issue. It was only in the late 20th century, after the fall of the Soviet regime, that documents and confessions finally confirmed Soviet culpability. The revelation of the Katyn massacre's truth had profound consequences. It reshaped Poland's post-war identity, highlighted the brutal methods used by Stalin's regime, and exposed the dark side of wartime alliances. The massacre is a painful reminder that in World War II, the enemies were not only the Nazis but also the totalitarian Soviet system. Families of the victims endured decades of silence, not knowing the fate of their loved ones. The mass graves became sites of pilgrimage and memory once the truth emerged, honoring those who were executed not for crimes, but for who they were, the leaders and thinkers of a nation. Katyn remains a stark example of how history can be manipulated and hidden to serve political ends. The Massacre challenges the simplistic narrative of good versus evil in World War II and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about alliances, propaganda, and human cruelty. The legacy of Katyn is a call for transparency, justice, and remembrance. It reminds us that war's horrors extend beyond the battlefield, and that uncovering suppressed history is essential to understanding the full scope of human suffering and resilience during times of conflict. The Manhattan Project is often described as one of the greatest scientific achievements in history, an intense, secret endeavor that developed the world's first atomic bombs and decisively ended World War II. Its success brought immense power into the hands of the United States, but behind the breakthrough was a profound ethical crisis that many of the project's leading scientists struggled with in silence. While the world remembers the explosion over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, few know about the deep moral opposition and internal conflict among the very people who created the bomb. The Manhattan Project began in 1939, when fears grew that Nazi Germany was working on nuclear weapons. The U.S. government mobilized an enormous team of physicists, chemists, and engineers, recruiting some of the brightest minds from around the globe. The goal was clear: develop an atomic bomb before the Nazis could. But as the project advanced, many scientists began to question the consequences of their work. One of the first to express concerns was Leo Szilard, a physicist who helped initiate the project by warning President Roosevelt about the potential of nuclear fission as a weapon. Szilard and others hoped the bomb would be a deterrent, but as the weapon neared completion, they worried about its catastrophic destructive power and the future it would create. They feared it would open the door to unprecedented levels of devastation and a nuclear arms race. Robert Oppenheimer, often called the father of the atomic bomb, led the scientific effort at Los Alamos. Though deeply dedicated to the project, Oppenheimer was plagued by doubts. After witnessing the first successful test explosion in July 1945, he famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." His words reflected the profound sense of responsibility and fear that the bomb's power evoked among the scientists. Not everyone involved supported the idea of using the bomb on populated cities. Several scientists signed petitions urging the U.S. government to consider alternatives, such as demonstrating the bomb's power on an uninhabited area or waiting for Japan to surrender. They argued that dropping the bomb on civilians would cross a moral line and set a dangerous precedent. Yet their warnings were largely ignored. Political and military leaders believed the bomb was necessary to end the war quickly and save American lives. The intense rivalry with Japan, combined with fears of Soviet expansion, pushed decision-makers to authorize the bombings of Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. After the war, many Manhattan Project scientists became vocal advocates for nuclear disarmament and arms control. They warned of the dangers of nuclear proliferation and urged governments to prevent future use of such weapons. Organizations like the Federation of American Scientists were founded by these former project members to promote peace and scientific responsibility. The story of the Manhattan Project's ethical dilemma complicates the common narrative of scientific progress as an unalloyed good. It shows how innovation can come with terrible costs and how even the brightest minds wrestle with questions of right and wrong. The scientists' opposition was not just about strategy but about the moral implications of unleashing a weapon of mass destruction on humanity. Their struggles continue to resonate today as the world grapples with nuclear weapons and the threat of global annihilation. The legacy of the Manhattan Project is a reminder that scientific discovery is inseparable from ethical responsibility. The decisions made in those secret laboratories shaped not only the outcome of World War II but also the future of international relations, warfare, and human survival. Understanding this hidden opposition among the Manhattan Project scientists adds a layer of humanity to the history of World War II. It reveals that behind the headlines of victory and devastation were individuals torn between duty and conscience, science and morality. Their story invites us to reflect on how we use knowledge and power and the importance of ethical considerations in shaping our world. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?